Marcus Blackwood had ruled the vampire kingdom for over 3 centuries, but tonight felt different from all the rest. The ancient castle walls seemed to whisper secrets as he materialized from the shadows, 2 days earlier than anyone expected. His long black coat swept behind him as he moved through the corridors with supernatural silence, his pale skin almost glowing in the moonlight that streamed through the tall windows. The trip to the Northern Territories was supposed to last another week. Political meetings with other vampire lords always dragged on, filled with centuries-old grudges and territorial disputes. But something had called him home early, an unexplainable pull that made his dead heart feel restless. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong at Ravencroft Castle. As he approached his private quarters, he heard voices coming from inside. One belonged to Elena Rodriguez, his most trusted maid who had served his family for nearly 50 years. The other voice made his blood run cold with rage. It was smooth, charming, and belonged to someone who had no business being in his chambers at this hour. Marcus pressed himself against the stone wall, using his enhanced vampire hearing to listen carefully. Elena's voice was urgent, almost panicked. "You need to keep quiet, David. If anyone discovers what we've been doing while the master is away, we're both dead. Do you understand me? Dead." David Chen laughed softly, and Marcus recognized the sound. David was his younger brother's closest friend and advisor, someone Marcus had trusted completely. The betrayal cut deeper than any silver blade could. "Relax, Elena. Marcus won't be back for days. We have plenty of time to finish what we started. Besides, who's going to tell him? The other servants are too scared to speak, and the guards are loyal to whoever pays them best." Marcus felt his fangs extend involuntarily as rage filled his ancient veins. Whatever conspiracy was unfolding in his own home, it involved 2 people he had trusted with his life. Elena had been like family to him, caring for the castle and its secrets with unwavering loyalty. David had been a frequent guest, someone Marcus considered almost a brother. "This is madness," Elena whispered fiercely. "You don't know him like I do." Marcus can sense deception from miles away. "When he returns and finds out what you've convinced me to do, he'll destroy us both without hesitation." "That's only if he finds out," David replied smoothly. "And how will he? The evidence will be gone by tomorrow night. Robert Harrison will take care of the final details, and then everything will return to normal. Marcus will never know his precious kingdom was sold from under him while he played politics with dusty old vampires." Robert Harrison. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Harrison was the human lawyer who had been handling legal affairs for vampire families for decades. If he was involved, this conspiracy went deeper than simple theft or betrayal. They were talking about selling his kingdom, his ancestral home, his very legacy. Marcus moved closer to the door, his supernatural senses picking up more details. He could smell fear radiating from Elena, mixing with guilt and desperation. David, however, smelled confident, almost excited. There was something else, too, a scent Marcus couldn't quite identify but that made his predatory instincts scream warnings. "The contracts are already prepared," David continued. "Harrison has been working with the human developers for months. They think they're buying an old castle to turn into a luxury hotel. They have no idea about the supernatural protections, the ancient burial grounds, or the portal to the shadow realm in the basement. By the time Marcus returns from his meeting, the sale will be finalized and the money will be in offshore accounts." Elena's voice cracked with emotion. "My family has served the Blackwood line for generations. My grandmother died protecting Marcus's father during the Vampire Wars. How did you convince me to betray everything I was raised to honor?" "Because you're smart enough to see the truth," David said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality that Marcus now recognized as vampire persuasion. "The old ways are dying, Elena. Vampire kings ruling from shadows, ancient castles filled with dusty treasures, feudal systems that haven't changed in centuries. The human world is evolving, and we need to evolve with it or be left behind. Marcus realized with growing horror that David wasn't just betraying him for money. This was ideological, a complete rejection of vampire tradition and hierarchy. David believed the old ways should die, and he was willing to destroy Marcus's kingdom to prove his point. Besides, David continued, you've seen how the other servants live, barely scraping by, afraid to speak above a whisper, treated like furniture that happens to breathe. When this is over, you'll have enough money to disappear completely. Buy a house in Spain, live in the sunshine, never worry about vampire politics again. Through the crack in the door, Marcus caught sight of Elena's face. Tears were streaming down her weathered cheeks, but her expression showed determination mixed with terror. She was trapped between loyalty to her family's legacy and the promise of freedom from centuries of servitude. What about the other servants? Elena asked quietly. Maria, Thomas, little Catherine, who just started working in the kitchens. What happens to them when the humans take over the castle? David shrugged carelessly. Not our problem. Harrison's buyers will probably keep some staff for the hotel conversion. The others will find new positions or not. That's how progress works, Elena. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. The casual dismissal of people who had devoted their lives to serving his family made Marcus's vision blur with rage. These weren't just employees to him. They were part of an extended family that had grown over centuries, humans who had chosen to bind their lives to vampire nobility in exchange for protection, purpose, and belonging. Marcus heard movement in the room and pressed himself deeper into the shadows. Through the partially open door, he watched Elena walk to his private desk and pull out an ornate silver key, the key to his personal vault, where centuries of family treasures and important documents were stored. This is the last thing you need? Elena asked, her voice barely audible. The last thing, David confirmed. Harrison needs the original deed to the castle and the surrounding lands. Some of the documentation goes back to the 1600s, but human lawyers love their paperwork. Once we have those documents, the sale can proceed without any legal complications. Elena held the key like it weighed 1,000 pounds. If I give you this, there's no going back. Once those documents leave the castle, Marcus will know what we've done the moment he returns. Then we better make sure everything is finished before he gets back, David said with finality. Give me the key, Elena. Think about that house in Spain. Think about waking up to sunlight instead of serving creatures of the night. Marcus watched Elena's internal struggle play out across her face. 50 years of loyalty warred with the promise of freedom and the fear of discovery. Finally, with a sob that broke Marcus's dead heart, she handed over the key. David's smile was triumphant as he pocketed the silver key. Good girl. Harrison is waiting in the village. I'll take the documents to him tonight, and by dawn everything will be set in motion. The buyers will arrive tomorrow evening for a final inspection, and the signing will happen the following night. What if Marcus comes back early? Elena whispered. He won't, David said confidently. I have friends among the northern lords. They'll make sure the political meetings drag on for several more days. By the time Marcus returns, he'll be presented with a fait accompli. The sale will be completed, the money transferred, and his precious kingdom will be in human hands. Marcus felt something inside him snap. The betrayal was complete, calculated, and devastating. Not only were they stealing his ancestral home, but they had conspirators among the northern lords keeping him away while the theft was completed. This wasn't just about money or ideology. This was a coordinated attack on everything he represented. But what struck him most deeply was Elena's tears. Even as she betrayed him, she was genuinely suffering. David had used vampire persuasion and promises of freedom to manipulate a woman who had spent 50 years of loyal service earning barely enough to survive. In her mind, she wasn't just betraying Marcus. She was finally claiming a life of her own after decades of invisible servitude. As David prepared to leave with the key to Marcus's vault, the Vampire King made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting them immediately, he would follow David and discover the full scope of the conspiracy. Only by understanding every player and every detail could he hope to save his kingdom and protect the innocent people caught in the middle of this betrayal. Marcus melted back into the shadows as David emerged from his chambers. The younger vampire moved with confident strides, obviously believing his plan was proceeding perfectly. He had no idea that the very person he was betraying was watching his every move, learning every detail, and planning a response that would shake the foundations of their supernatural world. The hunt was about to begin, and Marcus Blackwood had never been more dangerous than when protecting what belonged to him. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was fighting against, and that meant following David into what was certain to be a night that would change everything. Marcus followed David through the winding corridors of Ravencroft Castle, staying far enough back to remain undetected while keeping his target in sight. His centuries of experience as a predator served him well as he moved like a ghost through his own home, discovering secret passages and hidden routes he had forgotten existed. David made his way to the vault level, deep beneath the castle where the oldest and most valuable treasures were stored. Marcus watched from the shadows as David used Elena's key to open the massive steel door that protected centuries of family history. The sight of his trusted advisor casually rifling through irreplaceable documents made Marcus's ancient blood boil with fury. The Vampire King observed as David carefully selected specific papers from various collections, birth certificates, property deeds, lineage records, and most importantly, the original charter that granted the Blackwood family dominion over these lands in 1642. Each document David took represented not just legal ownership, but centuries of family legacy and supernatural authority. What troubled Marcus most was David's obvious familiarity with the vault's organization. He knew exactly where to find each document, suggesting this wasn't his first unauthorized visit. How long had this betrayal been in planning? How many times had Elena been convinced to provide access while Marcus was away on business? After gathering what he needed, David sealed the vault and made his way to a section of the castle Marcus rarely visited. The old servant tunnels connected to the village below through a network of passages built during the Vampire Wars for emergency evacuation. David clearly knew about these forgotten routes, further proving that this conspiracy had been carefully researched and planned. Marcus followed at a safe distance as David emerged into the village of Millbrook, a small community that had existed in the shadow of Ravencroft Castle for over 3 centuries. The relationship between the human villagers and the vampire nobility had always been complex, built on mutual benefit rather than fear. The Blackwood family provided protection from supernatural threats and economic stability through employment at the castle. In return, the villagers maintained the secrecy that allowed vampires to exist peacefully alongside human society. The village at midnight was quiet except for the warm lights emanating from the Brass Lantern Inn. Marcus watched David approach the inn with confident strides, obviously expected by whoever waited inside. The Vampire King positioned himself near a window where he could observe without being seen, his supernatural senses allowing him to hear conversations through the thick walls. Inside the inn, David was greeted by Robert Harrison, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place in the rustic tavern. Harrison had been the Blackwood family's legal representative for nearly 20 years, handling the complex paperwork required to maintain vampire property ownership in an increasingly bureaucratic human world. Marcus had trusted him completely, often relying on Harrison's expertise to navigate modern legal systems that didn't account for supernatural longevity. "About time," Harrison said as David approached his table. "I was starting to wonder if you'd gotten cold feet about this whole arrangement." "No cold feet," David replied, sliding into the seat across from Harrison. "Just had to wait for the right moment to get the documents. Elena finally came through, though she's not happy about it." Harrison opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "These are the final contracts. The buyers are represented by Winchester Development Corporation, though they don't know who they're really purchasing from. As far as they're concerned, this is a straightforward real estate transaction involving an old castle being sold by a reclusive aristocratic family. Marcus leaned closer to the window, straining to hear every detail of the conversation that would determine his fate and the future of his ancestral home. "The price is £15 million, Harrison continued. Considerably less than the property's actual value, but Winchester Development believes they're getting a bargain on a fixer-upper. They have plans to convert the castle into a luxury hotel and spa, capitalizing on the growing supernatural tourism market." David laughed darkly. If they only knew how supernatural that tourism would really be. What happens when they discover the portal to the Shadow Realm in the basement, or the ancient burial grounds that can't be disturbed without awakening things better left sleeping? "That's not our problem," Harrison said coldly. "Our job is to complete the sale and transfer the money to the accounts you've specified. What happens afterward is between the new owners and whatever supernatural complications they encounter." The casual dismissal of potentially catastrophic consequences made Marcus realize that this betrayal extended far beyond simple greed. These men were willing to put innocent humans in mortal danger and potentially destabilize the careful balance between the human and supernatural worlds. "What about the staff?" David asked. "Some of them have been at the castle for decades. They know things that could complicate the new ownership." Harrison shrugged dismissively. "The purchase contract includes an option for the new owners to retain existing staff, but there's no guarantee. Frankly, most of these people are too old or too set in their ways to adapt to modern hotel operations. Winchester Development will probably bring in their own management team and hire younger, more trainable employees." Marcus felt his rage intensify as he thought about Maria, the elderly cook who had been preparing meals at Ravencroft for over 40 years. She had never married, dedicating her entire life to serving the Blackwood family with pride and skill. The idea of her being discarded like unwanted furniture was unbearable. "There is one potential complication," Harrison continued, lowering his voice. "My contacts in the Northern Territories report that Marcus Blackwood has been asking questions about his property holdings. Apparently, someone mentioned rumors about unusual activity around the castle. If he decides to return early from his political meetings, this whole arrangement could fall apart." David's expression remained confident, but Marcus detected a hint of nervousness in his scent. "That's not going to happen. I have assurances from Lord Ashford and Lady Pemberton that the political discussions will continue for at least another week. They're both heavily invested in vampire political reform and see Marcus as an obstacle to modernization. Keeping him occupied while we complete this transaction serves their interests as well." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Lord Ashford and Lady Pemberton were vampires he had considered allies, nobles who had supported his leadership for decades. To learn that they were actively working against him as part of some broader political movement was devastating. This conspiracy reached into the highest levels of vampire society. "Good," Harrison said, gathering his papers. "Because Winchester Development is flying their representatives in from London tomorrow night. They want to complete a final inspection of the property before signing, and any delay could make them suspicious. We need this sale to proceed smoothly and quickly." David pulled the stolen documents from his coat and placed them on the table. "Everything you need is here. Original deeds, lineage records, property surveys from the 1800s, and the royal charter that established Blackwood ownership. Your buyers will have clear legal title to the entire estate." Harrison examined each document carefully, using a small flashlight to verify details and check for signs of forgery. Marcus watched his family's history being evaluated like merchandise, each paper representing generations of pride, tradition, and supernatural authority. "Perfect," Harrison said finally. "These documents will satisfy even the most thorough legal review. Winchester Development's lawyers will find nothing to question about the legitimacy of this sale." As Harrison carefully placed the documents in his briefcase, Marcus made a decision that would change the course of the evening. Instead of continuing to observe passively, it was time to take action. But rushing in without a complete understanding of the conspiracy would be foolish. He needed to know who else was involved and exactly how far this betrayal extended. What about the other family members? Harrison asked. Marcus has a younger brother and several cousins who might have legal claims to the estate. All handled, David replied smoothly. Marcus's brother Jonathan is completely absorbed in his art collection in Prague and hasn't visited Ravencroft in over 50 years. The cousins are scattered across Europe and haven't had contact with Marcus in decades. By the time any of them learn about the sale, it will be completed and the money will be beyond recovery. The casual dismissal of his family members' rights stung, but Marcus had to admit the assessment was accurate. His relationships with other Blackwood relatives had grown distant over the centuries, weakened by geographical separation and different approaches to adapting to the modern world. "There's one more thing," David said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Elena Rodriguez knows too much about the castle's supernatural protections. She's been managing those systems for 50 years and could cause serious problems for the new owners if she stays in the area." Harrison's expression grew cold. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing permanent," David said quickly. "Just that her retirement needs to be more than geographic. Maybe a nice long trip somewhere very far away, with clear financial incentives to stay quiet about what she knows." Marcus realized that Elena wasn't just being used as a tool for betrayal. She was also being set up as a liability to be eliminated once her usefulness ended. The woman who had served his family with unwavering loyalty for 50 years was being planned for exile or worse simply because she knew too much about the secrets she had helped protect. The conversation continued with discussions of timing, logistics, and contingency plans. Marcus learned that Winchester Development planned to begin renovation work immediately after the sale, starting with the upper levels of the castle while avoiding the basement areas where the most dangerous supernatural elements were located. The buyers had no idea they were purchasing property that contained a portal to another dimension, ancient burial grounds that housed restless spirits, and protective wards that kept far worse things from entering the human world. As the meeting concluded and the two conspirators prepared to leave, Marcus faced a critical decision. He could continue following them to learn more about the full scope of the conspiracy, or he could return to the castle to confront Elena and try to understand her motivations for betraying the family she had served for so long. The choice would determine not just his response to this immediate crisis, but the future of everyone who lived and worked at Ravencroft Castle. The next few hours would either save his ancestral home or watch it fall into human hands that had no understanding of the supernatural forces they would be unleashing. Marcus chose to return to the castle rather than continue following David and Harrison. Understanding Elena's motivations had become more important than gathering additional details about the conspiracy. As he made his way back through the secret passages, his mind raced with plans for confronting this betrayal while protecting the innocent people caught in its web. When he arrived at his private chambers, he found Elena still there, sitting in his favorite chair with her head in her hands. She was crying softly, her shoulders shaking with each sob. The sight of this strong woman, who had managed his household with iron efficiency for 50 years, reduced to such despair made Marcus pause before revealing himself. "I know you're there, Master Blackwood," Elena said without looking up. "I can feel your presence the same way I have for the past 5 decades. You returned early, didn't you?" Marcus stepped out of the shadows, his expression carefully controlled despite the rage and hurt churning inside him. 2 days early, long enough to hear everything. Elena finally looked up, her face streaked with tears but showing no surprise at being caught. "Then you know what I've done. You know that I've betrayed everything my family stood for, everything I was raised to believe in. I know that David Chen manipulated you using vampire persuasion and false promises," Marcus said quietly. "I know that Robert Harrison is orchestrating the sale of my ancestral home to human buyers who have no idea what they're purchasing. And I know that you're not the villain in this story, Elena. You're another victim." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. She had clearly expected fury, punishment, perhaps even death. Instead, Marcus sat down across from her with an expression of genuine concern. "Tell me how this started," Marcus said. Help me understand how David convinced you to betray a family you've served with such loyalty for so long. Elena wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. It began about 6 months ago. David started visiting more frequently while you were away on business. At first, he seemed genuinely interested in the castle's history and the challenges of maintaining such an old property. He asked thoughtful questions about the staff, about our working conditions, about whether we ever felt appreciated for our service. Marcus listened without interrupting, recognizing the subtle psychological manipulation that had been employed. David had spent months building trust and identifying Elena's vulnerabilities before moving to exploit them. He talked about the changing world, Elena continued, how vampire society was evolving and how the old feudal relationships between nobles and servants were becoming outdated. He painted pictures of staff members being treated as true partners rather than invisible servants. He made me believe that helping him modernize the castle's operations would benefit everyone who worked here. But it wasn't really about modernization, was it? Marcus asked gently. Elena shook her head, fresh tears flowing. Not once he started using his vampire abilities on me. At first it was subtle, just a slight push to make me more receptive to his ideas, more willing to share information about the castle's routines and security measures. By the time I realized what he was doing, I was already too deep to pull back without destroying myself. Marcus felt his anger toward Elena dissolving, replaced by fury at David's manipulation. Using vampire persuasion on humans was considered one of the most serious ethical violations in their society, punishable by exile or worse. That David had done so to someone under Marcus's protection made it a personal insult as well as a crime. He promised that the sale would benefit everyone, Elena continued. The new owners would modernize the castle, provide better working conditions, and offer generous severance packages to any staff who wanted to leave. He made it sound like I would be freeing everyone from lives of servitude rather than destroying the only home most of us have ever known. And when did you realize the truth? Marcus asked. Tonight, Elena whispered. When he talked about Maria and Thomas and little Catherine like they were disposable furniture, when he made it clear that none of us mattered beyond our usefulness to his plan, I realized that everything he had promised was a lie designed to make me feel better about betraying you. Marcus reached across and gently took Elena's hands in his own. They were trembling with fear and exhaustion, the hands of someone who had spent 50 years caring for others and asking for very little in return. Elena, I want you to listen to me very carefully, Marcus said. You are not responsible for David's crimes. You are not to blame for falling victim to supernatural manipulation that you had no defense against. And you are not going to suffer for his betrayal. Elena looked up in surprise. But Master, I gave him access to your most private chambers. I handed over the key to your family vault. I enabled the theft of documents that trace your lineage back 4 centuries. How can you not hold me responsible? Because holding you responsible would be like blaming a victim of assault for not fighting hard enough, Marcus replied firmly. David used supernatural abilities specifically designed to override human free will. What happened to you was a violation, not a choice. For the first time since Marcus had revealed himself, Elena showed hope rather than despair. What are you going to do? Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the village lights below. I'm going to stop this sale and protect everyone who lives and works at Ravencroft Castle, but I need your help to do it properly. Anything, Elena said immediately. Tell me how to fix what I've broken. First, I need you to contact Maria, Thomas, and the other senior staff members. Don't alarm them, but make sure they're all accounted for and safe. If David's plan includes eliminating witnesses, tonight might be dangerous for anyone who knows too much about the castle's supernatural elements. Elena nodded and stood to leave, but Marcus continued speaking. Second, I need you to prepare a complete list of everyone who has had access to the castle over the past 6 months. Every delivery person, maintenance worker, visitor, and guest. David didn't plan this conspiracy alone. And I need to identify all of his accomplices. Yes, Master. I keep detailed records of everyone who enters the castle, I can have that list ready within an hour. Third, Marcus said, turning back to face her, I need you to do something that might be the most difficult thing I've ever asked of you. Elena straightened her shoulders, showing the strength that had made her such an effective household manager for 5 decades. What do you need? I need you to forgive yourself, Marcus said softly. What happened tonight was not your fault, and I will not allow you to carry guilt for David's crimes. You have served this family with honor and dedication far beyond what any of us had the right to expect. That service doesn't become less valuable because you fell victim to supernatural manipulation. Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than despair. Thank you, Master Blackwood. I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life making up for what happened tonight. No, Marcus said firmly. You will spend the rest of your life being valued and appreciated for the remarkable woman you are. The days of invisible servitude are over, Elena. When this crisis is resolved, things are going to change at Ravencroft Castle. David was right about one thing. The old ways of treating staff like property rather than people need to evolve. As Elena left to begin her tasks, Marcus turned his attention to the larger challenge of stopping the sale and dealing with the conspiracy. David's plan was sophisticated and involved multiple layers of deception, legal manipulation, and supernatural coercion. Simply confronting the conspirators directly might not be enough to undo the damage they had already done. Marcus activated his secure communication system and began contacting allies throughout the vampire community. If Lord Ashford and Lady Pemberton were part of a broader political movement against traditional vampire authority, he needed to know who else might be involved and how far the conspiracy extended. His first call was to Lady Victoria Sterling, an ancient vampire who had been his mentor centuries ago. Victoria answered immediately, as if she had been expecting his contact. Marcus, my dear boy, Victoria's voice carried warmth mixed with concern. I was hoping you would call. There are disturbing rumors circulating through supernatural society about challenges to traditional authority structures. Some of the younger vampires seem to believe that the old families are obstacles to progress rather than pillars of stability. It's more than rumors, Victoria, Marcus replied grimly. I've uncovered a conspiracy to steal my ancestral home and sell it to human buyers who have no idea what they're purchasing. The plan includes vampire lords keeping me distracted while the theft is completed. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Who is involved? David Chen is the primary organizer, working with my human lawyer, Robert Harrison. Lord Ashford and Lady Pemberton are providing political cover by prolonging my meetings in the Northern Territories. There may be others. This is worse than I feared, Victoria said. David Chen has been recruiting allies for what he calls vampire modernization throughout supernatural society. He's convinced many younger vampires that traditional authority structures are holding back progress and integration with human society. Marcus felt the full scope of the threat becoming clear. This wasn't just an attack on his property or his family. It was part of a broader movement to overthrow the social structures that had maintained stability in vampire society for centuries. What do you recommend? Marcus asked. Expose them publicly, Victoria replied immediately. David's movement depends on the belief that they represent progress and modernization. If you can prove that they're willing to endanger humans and destabilize supernatural protections for personal gain, their support will evaporate quickly. And how do I do that? Let them complete their plan, Victoria said, her voice taking on a strategic tone. But make sure you control the consequences. When Winchester Development arrives tomorrow night to inspect the property they think they're buying, arrange for them to discover exactly what they're really getting into. Marcus understood immediately. Show them the portal to the Shadow Realm. Let them experience the ancient protective wards. Make it clear that they're not buying a simple castle, but a supernatural fortress that requires specific knowledge and abilities to maintain safely. Exactly, and make sure David and Harrison are present when that revelation occurs. When the human buyers realize they've been deliberately misled about the supernatural dangers involved, they'll demand answers. David's political movement won't survive the exposure of such reckless endangerment. As they discussed the details of this strategy, Marcus felt his confidence returning. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also provided an opportunity to address larger problems within vampire society. David's conspiracy would be stopped, but more importantly, the dangerous ideology behind it would be discredited before it could cause broader damage. The next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of Ravencroft Castle. Marcus was ready for the battle ahead, and this time he would not be fighting alone.